Within every woman, there are psychic forces that operate far beyond conscious will. Jung called these forces archetypes, primordial, universal images that shape our most intimate experiences. In the case of the feminine psyche, two of these archetypes stand out particularly intensely: the maiden and the great mother. Understanding the tension between these two figures is essential to recognize why so many women remain trapped in the illusion of eternal youth, even when everything around them is already crying out for transformation. The maiden is the image of purity, beauty, and freshness. She represents potential, openness to the new, the hope for something grand that is yet to come. She is the one who enchants, who seduces, who dreams. She is light, solar, inspiring. In youth, this archetype is vital. It drives the desire to explore the world, to experience, to seek something beyond known limits. But the problem begins when this image remains dominant in adulthood. When the maiden does not make space for other aspects of the psyche to manifest, she becomes an obstacle. She prevents the woman from maturing, from establishing herself in the world, from taking responsibility for her own destiny. The woman continues to see herself as potential, but never allows herself to be realization. She remains in the eternal almost. Almost knows what she wants, almost surrenders, almost finds herself. And this almost becomes a black hole, an emotional vortex that sucks away vitality, purpose, and meaning. Marie-Louise von Franz writes that the maiden who refuses to die symbolically cannot be reborn as a whole woman. And here we are not talking about physical death, but the symbolic death of the childish ego, that part of us that insists on living in fantasy, that seeks to be saved, that rejects the weight of reality. This death is painful, yes, but absolutely necessary, because only from it can the Great Mother, the archetype of maturity, nourishment, and wisdom, emerge. The Great Mother is not the nice, domesticated woman who cared for everyone and forgot about herself. No, she is the queen of her own inner world. She commands, nurtures, sustains, and transforms. Unlike the maiden, who waits to be chosen, the Great Mother chooses. Unlike the maiden, who wants to be admired, the Great Mother demands respect. She does not need to be charming because she is whole. She is the one with deep roots, who knows when to give, when to protect, when to withdraw. The woman who embodies this archetype stops asking for permission to exist. She simply exists, with presence, depth, and direction. But few reach that point. Because the path requires sacrifice, the maiden must die for the queen to be born. And this is a passage that the Puella Aeterna does not want to make. She clings to the mirror of youth, to the promises of idealized love, to the illusion that time does not pass. But time passes. And when a woman refuses the call of maturity, she begins to wither inside. The archetype of the maiden, which was a source of brilliance, becomes a gilded cage. Jung, when speaking about feminine individuation, points out that a woman only becomes complete when she integrates what is hidden within her, not just the seductive image she shows to the world, but also her creative, destructive, and regenerative powers. The woman who lives only in the domain of the maiden is fragmented. She is half. And as long as she is half, she will be dependent, unstable, and vulnerable. Do you feel that there is something more in you, something stronger, deeper, more true? You are right. That something is your inner queen, waiting for the moment when you will stop fleeing and start to reign. But before that, we need to look honestly at the places where the Puella sabotages her life, where she undermines her relationships, her career, her decisions. Because if you do not see where the eternal girl is operating, she will continue to be in charge, without you realizing it. And that is exactly what we will explore next, where the Puella acts, how she sabotages, and what she is trying to avoid at all costs. The Puella Aeterna is seductive. She has something charming, almost magical. She is creative, impulsive, spontaneous. She is always full of new ideas, overwhelming passions, and grand plans. But this energy cannot sustain the weight of the real world. She shines brightly, and then disappears. Because deep down, she doesn't want to sustain anything. She wants to feel, dream, experience, but not to stay. In relationships, this is devastating. The Puella wants love, but she doesn't want commitment. She idealizes the perfect partner, the sublime connection, the absolute fusion. But the moment the other shows themselves to be human, flawed, real, she pulls away. She starts saying that it's not like it used to be, that something has changed, that the magic is gone. The truth is that the magic never existed. It was projection. She projected onto the other what she has not yet found within herself: stability, depth, emotional structure. Marie-Louise von Franz, in The Problem of the Puella Aeterna, describes the woman who, dominated by this archetype, lives in search of a savior, someone to pull her out of her internal confusion, to bring meaning to her existence. But when that man appears, she demands so much from him that no one can sustain, and frustrated, she returns to her cycle of idealization and rejection. This oscillation is typical of the Puella. She wants the ecstasy of the encounter, but she doesn't want the work of the bond. Because every bond requires renunciation, confrontation, frustration, and she is not willing to deal with that. In her career, sabotage follows the same pattern. The Puella is always seeking something that makes sense, something that matches her essence. She has difficulty accepting routine, discipline, continued effort. Everything that requires consistency suffocates her. So she starts projects with enthusiasm but abandons them at the first sign of boredom. She changes fields, courses, jobs, always thinking that she hasn't found her true mission yet. She says she is demanding, that she seeks authenticity. But often, she is just fleeing from the inevitable pain that every real path requires. Emma Jung, in Animus and Anima, warns of this type of woman whose animus, the rational and structuring function of the unconscious, is still immature. This manifests in inflated speech, full of grand ideas, but with little concrete achievement. The woman dominated by the Puella talks a lot about herself, her gifts, her unique vision of the world, but cannot root this in something tangible, because the animus has not yet been confronted or worked through. It remains as a seductive but empty discourse, and the woman continues adrift. And there are also the choices, or rather, the refusal to choose. The Puella is terrified of definitive decisions, because choosing something means giving up other possibilities. It means closing cycles, leaving parts of herself behind. And this is unbearable for her. Therefore, she lives in the eternal maybe. Maybe she wants this. Maybe she will follow that. Maybe she will return. Maybe she will change again. This maybe keeps her in a suspended state where nothing truly flourishes because nothing has truly been planted. What this woman has not yet understood is that maturing is not losing freedom. It is conquering it. Freedom is not being able to escape everything. It is being able to stay, to be able to build, to be able to sustain one's own existence with dignity. But behind all this instability, there is something deeper, something that often the woman herself cannot name. A hidden pain, a psychic wound, an existential void that the Puella tries to mask with movement, with romances, with new ideas. And it is this secret pain that we need to illuminate now. Because the Puella is not just a behavioral pattern. She's a symptom of something much more intimate, a soul that feels alone, lost, and too scared to embrace her wholeness. In the next part, we will dive into the shadow of the eternal girl and reveal the silent pain she tries to hide behind her enchantment. The Puella Aeterna enchants. She lights up the places she passes through with her lightness, her spontaneity, her almost mystical aura of eternal youth. She is sweet, delicate, sensitive, and yet deeply restless. She carries in her gaze a mix of hope and emptiness. Because behind all that shine, there is a pain that almost no one sees, and that many times she herself cannot name. This woman lives dominated by a fantasy. The fantasy that if she is good enough, beautiful enough, and lovely enough, she will be loved, protected, and guided by someone stronger, the charming prince who will come to place her in the spot where she can finally live happily ever after. She does not consciously acknowledge this, of course, but her behaviors betray her. The constant passivity, the chronic indecision, the need to please everyone, the paralyzing fear of displeasing, the insatiable quest for external approval. The Puella is the woman who speaks sweetly, who hesitates to make decisions alone, who prefers to wait for others to do, say, or resolve. She wants to be guided. She wants to be desired. She wants to be saved. And when the supposed savior appears, a real man, with his flaws, contradictions, and limitations, she is deeply disappointed, because reality never matches the ideal. And she, who projected all the resolution of her own existence onto him, feels betrayed, misunderstood, abandoned. Thus begins the cycle of escape, rejection, and new idealization. Marie-Louise von Franz describes this behavior with an almost painful clarity. The Puella lives in an emotional childlike state, still waiting for someone or something to come and fill her inner void. But since this filling never comes from the outside, because it cannot come, she fragments slowly. The fantasy that was once her refuge begins to turn into a prison. And what once protected her from the world now isolates her from it. Often, this archetype develops narcissistic traits. The Puella becomes obsessed with herself, with her image, her reflection, her appearance. She revolves around the mirror, real or symbolic, and expects the world to validate her all the time. The other exists only as an audience, an external mirror that must reflect her beauty, her grace, her sensitivity. And when the other fails to fulfill this role, she reacts with anger, contempt, or emotional coldness. This self-absorption prevents her from seeing the suffering of others. Empathy is superficial, strategic. She knows how to appear sensitive, but deep down, her attention is always focused on her own inner drama. A drama that she amplifies in thoughts, gestures, and words as if she were living an eternal romantic play. The Puella is both the actress and the spectator of her own life. And on this stage, the plot is always the same. She waits, she enchants, she is disappointed, she suffers, but she never changes. And there is one theme that terrifies her deeply: time. The idea of aging is unbearable, because the archetype of the eternal girl is closely linked to physical youth, fresh beauty, and the enchantment that only novelty brings. When the years begin to pass and the marks of time appear in the mirror, she enters a crisis. The fantasy begins to crumble, and with it, the identity she has built also collapses. She tries to resist. She invests in appearance, in performative affection, in emotional distractions. But nothing stops the approaching psychic collapse, because the problem was never time. It was the fact that she never built a solid, mature, real internal foundation. Without this structure, the passage of time becomes an existential threat, and many, unfortunately, succumb.